Buenas tardes, audiófilos y audiófilas. Estoy aquí con el gran Parker Litchfield. Parker es uno de los miembros más importantes de la compañía Soundsmith. Ellos fabrican fonocaptores y también hacen todo tipo de reparaciones. Hello, Parker. How are you?
Doing great, thank you. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm so grateful that you particularly, fixed my Meridian 207 player. I am enjoying it so much. You did such a good job. I know that you basically had to rebuild it from scratch. It's like a brand new unit.
It was a challenge. A lot of parts, yeah.
And I'm excited that you guys put like a new old stock laser on it, which those are like hen's teeth.
Oh, we've got a bunch. It's pretty wild. We've got an entire box of CDM 2s and 4s at Soundsmith. We've got the industrial versions that are fully cast aluminum.
Holy moly!
Yeah, they're insane.
You know, I had to sell
brand new.
I had a Krell CD player, which I sold cheap on eBay because nobody wanted to support it. Even Krell said they didn't support it. And I wish I would have known. But now
that's what happens with a lot of these old electronics is the manufacturers no longer support it. And we do end up with a lot of, I'm not going to name any names, but really high-end modern manufacturers, a lot of their older equipment ends up for service at Soundsmith.
Maybe I should just go on eBay and get a nice Revox or a Krell from that era so I can get the you guys put the laser in.
Yeah, the Revox was a really sweet player. We've actually got a couple of those at Soundsmith. They're extremely rare from what I've been told.
Great. Well, I just wanted to share a little bit of time with you and my subscribers, and wanted to ask you a couple of questions. Tell me about your education. You're an engineer by formation.
Yeah, I studied mechanical engineering at University of Hartford, and as soon as I got out, I was looking around. I was working at a bike shop as a bicycle technician for high-end mountain bikes and road bikes, and
That's
that was
a little bit
fun.
Overqualified, but okay.
It was a blast. I was having so much fun. So I went from that job. I saw the Soundsmith tour on YouTube. My boss recommended Soundsmith to look for an engineering position, and I looked at their tour on YouTube and I said, "This place is perfect." I went there for an interview, and Peter hired me the next day, which I guess he liked me.
You're very likable. I've met you in person, and you're a very nice guy. And what kind of stuff do you do at Soundsmith?
At Soundsmith, my title there is senior engineer. A lot of what I do is not necessarily pertaining to engineering. What I do is service. Most of the time, I'm fixing vintage hi-fi equipment, really esoteric stuff that is extremely challenging. We're like the last barrier between this gear and the dumpster. Lots of really incredible stuff that's through Soundsmith, and everything is different. It's pretty wild. So aside from that, I do help out with a lot of engineering challenges, put out a lot of fires, and talk with our various suppliers of components and materials. Design ways to make our cartridges easier to make and more precise. It's just everything involved in the production line is extremely challenging and requires a lot of attention. And so it's just a new thing every day.
And in addition to fixing stuff and building cartridges, you also, I understand, you also make your own stuff. You're sort of a DIY, do-it-yourself guy. You like to make your own stuff?
I do a lot of DIY audio and vintage restorations on my own and modifications. Basically, my entire system is DIY, except for the JBLs. Everything from the source to the entire signal chain I basically made or modified.
How are those JBLs? They're not too expensive. They're not crazy expensive, right?
Oh no, they're actually affordable. Oh, relatively speaking, depending on who you ask. But they were $1,000 for the pair shipped. They're pretty massive for $1,000, and they have really high-end parts. You would not believe the woofers in these speakers.
Really? Do
Yeah,
they have like cast? Are they cast and everything?
yeah, they are cast 8-inch baskets with FDM optimized, not FDM, FEA, finite element analysis optimized baskets with dual sandwich ferrite magnets and a sandwich cone. It's a paper, laminate paper and polycarbonate cone. They call it polyplast, and it's got really good damping and impulse response. I did pull out the woofers and measure them because I have this tool here. I keep it at my desk. It's the new Dayton Audio DATS V3, which measures speakers, transducers. And I was surprised with how much value the JBL Studio series has.
Hmm. I remember seeing those speakers for the first time in this guy is one of the guys I follow. His name is Z Reviews. You probably know him.
I've seen that video.
Yeah, and he had the little ones with a tiny like 5-inch woofer or something. He was getting started back then. He didn't have that much experience with high-end speakers, but he still loves them.
Yeah, they're fantastic. I have the 530s in my other desk over there in Nearfield, and they're superb.
Wow, I didn't know that. I would think that you have to spend, $100,000 on the Everests or something like that.
No, they're really good for the money. The Studio series, I highly recommend them. The 530s have impressive bass response for a bookshelf. They're pretty large too. The
Yeah.
woofers are very close to the bottom of the cabinet, so they couple with the desk pretty well, and that way they can get really linear extension, especially in near field.
And with those speakers against the wall, the way you have them, you probably get amazing bass too.
Yeah, they're basically corner loaded. I've got a couple mattresses in this room for damping, and it's pretty acoustically sound. I have the port plugs in. They came with foam port plugs. I tried to linearize the bass response. What I do is I try to acoustically get flat FR just by room placement and microphone placement. I have a measurement mic here. That's actually what I'm using for this interview.
It sounds good. And now let me ask you, you really, because you're an engineer and you're working at a high precision company, do you think that sound quality can be measured? You do a lot of measurements, but does that correlate with what you hear as an audiophile?
I mean, measurements can only tell you so much, and you can measure every single parameter of a piece of equipment, and it still doesn't tell you how it sounds, which is it's one of the most challenging things about being an audio engineer is balancing the two parts of your mind, is the objective side and the subjective side. And just because things work out on paper does not mean they'll translate into reality. And the same goes the other way. Just because it works in reality doesn't mean it's going to translate well on paper. One of my favorite things that Peter says, well, it works in practice but doesn't work in theory, which is the backwards of.
Yes. Well, it's a good example of that would be a tube versus solid state and digital versus analog, because the tube is supposed to be inferior to the transistor, yet it seems to be more pleasing to the eye and more natural to us.
Well, a lot of tubes' distortion characteristics are even orders, so they're less audible and less perceptible by the human ear. So you'll see these amps with 1 or 2% THD, but it's all second order. You won't hear it as much as you would at odd order harmonics. So that's part of why tubes can sound good while being such an antiquated technology, is their distortion characteristics.
I had a very nice man in my interviews the other day. We did about 5 chapters. He's from El Salvador, and he's a radio aficionado and a physics professor. And he was talking about that subject. He talked about RMS, which was one of the most important factors, was RMS in the tube specifications. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you also design or make your own cartridges?
I've Well, being an engineer and being given a ton of parts, I've been prototyping myself. I inherited, see if I can show it. It's back there on
Yeah.
top of the synthesizer. That's an old B&O RX2, and I inherited that, and it had a cartridge on there. Just so happens that B&O cartridges are completely proprietary, and Soundsmith is the only place in the world that makes them.
Yes.
So, given all the parts I was exposed with, I was given to make these cartridges, I ended up fixing my old one, all new parts, and then I ended up trying to improve it with scraps I had lying around, and ended up with a pretty decent performing cartridge. And then I stopped talking to Peter, and he ended up giving me better components, and that's what I'm using now.
So you have actually made a cartridge or modify it?
That what it was an MMC3 I modified, but it was to the point where it was completely different from the factory specification, using all different parts.
So you do that by using a microscope, I suppose.
Yeah, I've got a microscope here. I've got an optical microscope or a regular microscope, and then I've got a digital microscope that plugs into my computer, so I can take pictures up close of styli, have crosshairs, and help align styli and check if everything's square.
And you have this on a B&O turntable?
Yeah, I've got a B&O RX2, which is one of their non-tangential lower-end models. It's not the best, but it's decent performing for a vintage turntable. To get that kind of performance out of something today, you'd be spending upwards of $2,000. It's got suspension with spring steel leaf springs. It's pretty clever with how low profile it is and how it's suspended using tension strings.
I saw a very interesting B&O tone arm today on eBay. I don't know what I was doing, but it looks really nice, and it comes with the box and everything. It looks brand new, but it was a purpose-built tone arm that appeared to be just to be used in separate turntables. And I had like a,
Interesting.
it had
Yeah,
like
I've never heard of that.
and the point was like a Concord style thing. It looked like that. I don't know if there was already a cartridge built in or if it's just like a plug-in thing for the B&O cartridge.
Their early cartridges were cylindrical and did come down to a point, so maybe one of them was on there.
I'll send you the link. It looks very interesting. They're not asking a lot of money for it either. But what I was going to say...
idea of what it is.
Huh?
It could be something that came on one of their original turntables. They didn't have normal tone arms.
It looks very traditional, like a tone arm. But I was going to say that I had another chat with a guy who's really into turntables in Mexico, Ricardo Villanueva. And we discussed B&O because he said, you know, back in the 70s, his father or his friend had a B&O turntable that already had touch controls. In this was the 70s, and like, you know, this stuff was so advanced. And I suggested that maybe this stuff was designed by aliens and we just didn't get it.
I was just going to say that. Some of it was alien technology.
We were not ready. They were way too ahead.
Yeah.
Well, they still are. I mean, they're still coming up with incredible stuff.
They're not doing turntables anymore, which is unfortunate because some of their designs were fantastic. I mean, on the 6000 and 8000 series, they had this induction ring drive that was the most advanced drive mechanism I've ever seen on a commercially available turntable. It was absolutely brilliant, and it was a low mass platter system. It was beyond brilliant. I can't even put into words.
See, that sounds like Star Trek to me already. What was the name of the technology? A ring?
It was an induction ring drive, which it was really crazy because this way they could get the bearing at the center of mass of the whole drive system. It was basically like a spinning top. You could spin this platter. It was not heavy. It was a thin aluminum disc on an aluminum ring. You could spin it and it would go for 10 minutes.
It's the one that had the rubber lines like that, right?
It had lines on the platter.
Yeah.
All B&O turntables had that, but this one, it was tangential. It had a sloping lid.
Yes.
Look up B&O 8000, 8002 was their last one, I believe. There were so many models. But the drive
Do you
mechanism,
guys, do you have some of those at Soundsmiths for sale?
yeah, we've got a few. The problem is the computer system on that. They have a CPU, they have RAM, they have static memory, they have clocks, sensors. They have like 5 sensors. Turntable should never have that much uh, complexity, and because of that, they fail. They have a capacitor for the 5-volt rail on the CPU that fails, and if it sends enough ripple to the CPU, it can kill the processor. Depending how the capacitor fails, just dictates the nature of the repair of the device, basically. And the chips are impossible to find. One time I blew one up by accident, and it was a nightmare to fix that. Yeah.
Well, if you guys don't have it, then nobody has it. Does B&O have them?
B&O does not have them. That support for that has stopped maybe 30 years ago.
But it sounds interesting. Induction drive. It sounds like, I know my stove is induction, but it sounds like, does it use like sound waves or magnetism? It's magnetic?
It uses a sine wave over 2 inductors, basically, and it's got a differential drive between the two that imparts a magnetic force onto an aluminum ring. And that ring is sitting on the bearing.
Let me know when you're done so I can wake up because I'm completely confused.
It's brilliant. Just put it short. It's absolutely brilliant, and I've never seen anything that's actually better than that drive mechanism.
Wow. And then it's counterintuitive because you're saying it's a low mass platter. Everybody wants to have a platter this thick when they make a turntable. You know, they want a caterpillar platter.
It's not completely necessary. What is necessary is really good energy transfer. So what you want is the stylus energy from the energy emitted from your stylus, the mechanical energy that propagates across the record. You want that to go into the plinth as efficiently as possible, turning as little into heat. And that's achieved with a low mass system because it gets excited pretty easily. High mass, they essentially use the mass to absorb the wave.
That's remarkable. Now, the B&O cartridges have traditionally been moving iron cartridges. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're all moving iron fixed coil.
Are all the Soundsmith cartridges moving iron, or are there some different ones?
We make our entire magnetic lineup is moving iron. It's based on the original B&O design. And then we make a strain gauge, which is non-magnetic.
But there's no moving
mass.
coils. There's no moving coils or anything like that.
No, we don't make a moving coil.
And so the ones that you design or modify are also moving iron.
Yeah, what I've been playing with is moving iron.
I've noticed I have a little collection of cartridges, and I've noticed that when I have something that has really strong transients, some of it is just like salsa that I have, like when you hear the timbales and there's a lot of percussion, even my precious Miyajima, it seems like it cannot keep up with the rhythm. And whenever I try my moving irons, like the Empires or the AKGs, or I have these Nagatrons, they all are superb at the speed. The only thing I have a little bit of reservation about my moving irons is the tone quality. They all seem to be a little bit darker than the moving coils and all that. But in terms of speed, you can hear this. The transients are so responsive. Why is that? What makes the moving irons so interesting or superior in a way?
Well, the capability to design a magnetic system with a drastically decreased moving mass is the major advantage to a moving iron design. With moving coils, you also increase the the likelihood of failure of your system, because you have actual 1 mil, not always 1 mil, but down to 1 mil windings that can work harden and destroy themselves over time. The suspension is also another aspect of what makes moving iron a superior. Well, I like to think it's better.
Or at its advantages. Yeah.
Yeah, another advantage of the moving iron is the lack of a suspension wire. You don't need to pull the handling.
So that's what happens with some of my moving coil cartridges. I think after time the suspension changes, or if the cable gets a little bit loose, then the sound quality changes too, right?
Yeah, a lot of these we've seen everything at Soundsmith. Not everything. No one's seen everything, but we've seen a lot at Soundsmith. We've seen cartridges fail within 2 years of manufacturing, within 4 months of manufacturing cartridges the last 40 years. So it's basically dependent on the manufacturer's material choice, the stability and longevity of the design. But reducing the amount of moving parts is always a good place to go for making a more robust system. Reducing the possible points of failure is definitely makes things a lot easier.
I guess it also has to do with how often the cleaning lady comes by your audio system.
Yeah, or some kids.
Yes.
You never know what's going to happen.
That's right. And so because you're a do-it-yourself kind of guy, have you made your own amplifiers? Let's say, have you made a tube amp before?
Yeah, well, it was a kit. I built a bottlehead crack, which is a very popular tube headphone amplifier kit, and I did quite a few modifications to linearize it and make the build a lot easier and cleaner. And that's actually what I use mainly. That's over at my desk over there.
But the bottlehead is is known as a headphone amp, right? Can you also drive speakers with it?
I do not use speakers with it. It's output transformerless, so its output impedance is extremely high. It's like 150 ohms. Okay. So it's only really going to work with 300 ohm headphones or higher.
Speaking of headphones, what are you wearing now? What headphones do you have on?
iForman 4XXs, and I'm driving them off of a Mass Drop amp, so I got the Mass Drop setup, but I bought them all used.
You know, I do not go to that place anymore, Mass Drop, because every time I go, I can't help to buy something. And I'm also into watches. You know, it's like I can never go. That's how I ended up with most of the headphones I have. But I love my 650s. What's your opinion of the 650s?
Oh, they're amazing. I have the Mass Drop 6XXs. Those are the only thing I bought on Mass Drop. They are phenomenal. They're the most normal sounding headphones I've ever heard.
I think so, and I drive them with my Valhalla too, and they sound really nice with that.
Yeah, they're the cool thing about them is that they're 300 ohms, so they're gonna make any amplifier work its absolute best, because they're gonna stabilize the output stage by presenting such a high impedance load.
Right. So about headphones, if somebody is interested in becoming an audiophile and they can't afford it now, or they just don't know how to start, would you recommend them starting with headphones?
I mean, yeah, to a certain point, headphones are definitely going to have a higher price to performance ratio than speakers, but it all depends on your budget, I guess. Because if you can afford a pair of JBL Studio 530s on sale and a $150 Class D amplifier and a DAC, which is also going to work for your headphones, you're in for under $400. I mean, under $500. And you've got a speaker setup that's going to parallel even the best headphones. Under that price bracket, I would say that you can get some really incredible sound quality with reasonably priced headphones, especially the ones I'm using. You can get a pair of used large diaphragm planar magnetics for $150 new.
Wow. What? I mean, you can get under $1,000. You can get headphones that challenge $10,000 speakers, and you can get nice amplification and even a source or a very nice converter, one of those mass drop converters, which I have a few of them, the Chinese ones, SMSL or
SMSL, I love them.
the X Duo. I have this one in the computer. I'll show you. It's probably already obsolete.
Yeah.
It's
got a little display. I'm familiar with that. Yeah.
They probably already have a new model, but they're great. So you can have the whole system, maybe including the source if you have a little dongle streamer like the Google for less than $1,000. That would challenge much better stuff in terms of stereo.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what you're trying to go for. You're going to get definitely better bass response if you go with a pair of headphones because they're full range. A lot of these planar magnetics are completely linear to 20 hertz, which is very impressive. Especially these, I get incredible subwoofer-like bass that parallels the 590s, which is impressive. The only headphones I have that'll do that. They're not expensive.
You'll get better bass response for the headphones and a much better response from the neighbors.
Yeah, majorly more socially acceptable to not be getting noise complaints.
So I want to ask you also about tone arms because you're also involved in the design. You have like a Schroeder cooperation. I don't understand it. You can tell me. I know that Soundsmith has been. Peter is really good friends with. Is it Peter Schroeder? No, what's Schroeder?
Frank Schroeder.
Okay.
Yeah, Frank Schroeder.
Frank Schroeder
is a really, really brilliant engineer. He's amazing. Some of his stuff is just mind-boggling, and we're incredibly thankful that he gave us one of his designs. He just had a prototype, called it the Alto. I believe Peter and Frank may have come up with the name. I don't really know where the name came from, but he had this prototype tone arm, and he gave it to Soundsmith to manufacture. And
wow.
It was really, really cool. It was a counter-opposing needle bearing that's asymmetrically loaded, and it's really brilliant. So my job as an engineer is to basically convert this handmade tone arm into something that can be mass-produced or produced at a sort of scale, which is more challenging than you would anticipate.
I bet.
The machining processes involved are highly involved and very much oriented around attention to detail and single production run at a time, which is how Frank makes his arms. That's why his waiting list is almost 2 years to get a tone arm.
From beginning to end.
Yeah. Well, it would take about a couple of weeks or a couple of solid days work to create the tone arm from beginning to end, but his waiting list is very, very long because of the amount of attention he puts towards the production. So taking a design like that and trying to adapt it for any sort of scale, along with our own spin on it, which he probably is not going to like to hear, but I've had to...
It's okay. Nobody watches this channel. Don't worry.
I've had to do a couple important modifications to improve the performance of the arm and basically work with Peter to finalize the design and modernize it to our specification, because in the end we are producing it and it's not going to be made by Frank. So part of what I've been doing is making the arm grounded, which is a challenge unto its own. It's almost monumental challenge because the arm was not designed to carry the ground from the base through to the head shell.
I think you have told me about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It requires an incredible amount of precision and clever thinking in order to adapt a pre-existing design to have more features. I guess I'll leave it at that.
Okay, and I think it's not relevant, or it's just not high quality enough to introduce 3D printing or anything like that in the process.
I mean, VPI makes 3D printed tone arms that are pretty good. what they use is a powder deposition process where they have an electron beam sintering nylon powder, and that's an incredibly high-end machine.
Yeah,
Like $300,000 to buy into that.
it's not like the ones you see on the store making little figurines. No,
Not like the fused deposition where it's an extruder.
Yeah.
This is an electron beam laser
Wow.
and a giant powder bed. In order to make tone arms that are that big, you need a large build area that facilitates a large machine.
Now, I'm just wondering because most people will buy a turntable and they want to upgrade and they'll either get another mat or they'll try to get another cartridge. Why would anybody want to change the arm? I mean, what does an arm sound like?
Well, the goal for a tone arm is to sound like nothing. You basically want it to have really efficient energy transfers, similar to the platter, from your cartridge, from the stylus, through the cartridge, through the tone arm, down into your plinth. You want it to convert as little to heat as possible. And with that, the waves are going to meet in the plinth and null themselves, that's the theory. Or they'll get absorbed by the plinth if it's massive. But basically, you want it to have really good energy transfer. You want it to impart no friction on the bearing. No, you want to have no frictionless bearing to impart no force on the cantilever and stylus to keep your generator in perfect alignment. You want it to be adjustable in virtually any dimension you can think of. This includes azimuth, zenith, anti-skate. I would personally like to be able to tilt the bearing on my tone arm as well. I want to have absolute control of every dimension. And it's challenging to make something visually beautiful and also functional.
Yeah. So it should be like the cables. They should do no harm and they should not make a sound of their own. They should just allow the system to coexist and to gel more.
Yeah, that's the underlying theory. Speaking of wiring, the tone arm wiring is another challenge of creating a tone arm because you have capacitive coupling between the left and right channels, and you can actually increase or decrease your channel separation by the way your wires are routed inside the tone arm, by the way they're
really, if they're wrapped around or they're separate, or
depending how much capacitive coupling there is, it'll actually change the response of your cartridge.
Why is it that it's just recently with this current loading, whatever they call this new, I don't know if they're new, but the phono preamps that are coming out, that they have this open current, what's it called? The current mode. Why is it that now we have XLR balanced inputs from a turntable, but it was never that way? Why were turntables never balanced? Why didn't we have that system for turntables if it's such a noise-inducing issue?
Well, it's an inherently single-ended system. You have a left channel and a ground and a right channel and a ground. To convert that to balanced, you would still need to run single-ended into the preamplifier. So that's different from current mode. Current mode would be treating the cartridge as a current source instead of a voltage source, which some manufacturers have done. And unfortunately, Soundsmith cartridges do not work at all with current mode preamps because the crazy.
I think they only work with low output moving coils.
Yeah.
And I know for a fact that moving magnet cartridges don't really need to have this external ground. They can have internal ground because recently I changed the wire on my Technics SL1200. I changed the leads because I had noise problems, as you know. And unfortunately, I got the board from a DJ source. And in this phono board, they do the internal ground already in the pass of the board. They do a bridge between the grounds. Yeah. So you don't need to use the external ground. So when I installed it, it was great with the moving magnets. And as soon as I put a moving coil cartridge, the head shell, I got home. Because the moving coils need that grounding. the external grounding.
It's going to be different for basically every setup, and this is a thing with fixing old Bang & Olufsen turntables, is some of them had onboard preamps, some of them had really strange DIN connectors with unconventional grounding schemes, and we can have a turntable fully restored at Soundsmith, no hum on the test bench, send it to the guy's system, and it's humming like crazy. It has a lot to do with how your preamp is designed, as well as the ground scheme of the turntable.
When I was trying to troubleshoot my techniques, the noise, I talked to this guy in Canada who does all the DJ, that's all he does is fix 1200s. And I said, can I send it to you? He said, no, don't send it to me, because I know that when you send it to me, it won't make any noise.
Yeah.
It won't have a problem when I get it. So let's go back to the arms. Arms don't make noise. So if an arm is in the forest and there's no one, will it still be tracking?
That's a good question.
A tone arm. Anyway, I think I've tortured you enough for today. I really appreciate your time, and I'm a big fan of your work, and I love you guys, and I can't wait to get my hands on a very nice Soundsmith cartridge when I get back to work, because I'm unemployed now. But and I look forward to meeting with you, and you still have an open invitation to come check out my rig and give me your opinion on it.
I look forward to that.
And thank you for supporting our channel, and I'll talk to you another time, okay?
Yeah, anytime.
Take care, Parker.